This is what a clinical AI hallucination actually looks like. Not a science fiction failure, a grammar error with a six-figure downstream cost. Let's look at the architecture that lets it happen, and the 4 guardrails that stop it. A Nature paper last year reviewed 450 clinical notes from a leading ambient AI scribe. They found 191 hallucinations across 13,000 sentences. 44% were classified as major, capable of changing diagnosis or management if left uncorrected. That's the published number. The number we see when we audit production systems is higher, because the published studies look at the model's output. They don't look at what happens after that output hits the EHR. In this video, the 4 hallucination categories you'll actually encounter in production, the architecture pattern that creates each one, and the guardrails that catch them at the right layer before they become permanent. Category 1, fabrication. Fabrication is when the AI generates a clinical detail that was never said, never observed, never documented. The original case study that started this whole field, an AI confidently citing PubMed papers that did not exist, with PubMed IDs that pointed to entirely different papers. In production, fabrication looks more boring than that and more dangerous. The most common pattern we see, the model generates a physical exam finding that the physician never performed. Lungs clear to auscultation, no edema, cranial nerves intact, plausible, routine, often correct by chance, sometimes catastrophically wrong. A Nature study from September last year found exactly this in production ambient scribes, documenting examinations that never occurred, creating non-existent diagnoses, inventing medications that were not prescribed. Why does this happen? The model has been trained on thousands of clinical notes where lungs clear to auscultation appears near routine follow-up. And statistically, the most likely next sentence in a routine follow-up is exactly that. The model isn't lying, it is pattern completing. The failure mode is not random, it is biased toward the most common clinical phrasing, which means the failures are also the hardest to spot, because they sound exactly like every other note in the chart. Category 2, misattribution. This is the one that opens the video. It is also the one we see most often in production, and the one with the longest blast radius. Misattribution happens when the model assigns a clinical fact to the wrong person. Family history becomes personal history. Patient statement becomes physician assessment. A medication the patient stopped 3 years ago becomes an active prescription. A symptom the patient denied becomes a symptom the patient reported. Why is this worse than fabrication? Because it is internally consistent. The model didn't invent diabetes. The word diabetes was in the encounter. A human reviewer skimming the note will see diabetes, confirm it was discussed, and move on. The error survives the review. Within 90 days in the systems we audit, a single misattribution error typically appears in the active problem list, at least one insurance claim, the patient-facing portal, a population health risk score, and at least one care gap notification. 5 separate systems, 5 separate correction workflows. None of them talk to each other. You don't fix a misattribution error, you hunt it. Category 3, negation. This is the smallest hallucination by character count and the most dangerous by clinical impact. Negation hallucinations are when the model flips the polarity of a statement. Patient denies suicidal ideation becomes patient reports suicidal ideation. No known drug allergies becomes allergic to penicillin. Symptoms resolve becomes symptoms ongoing. In the Nature framework, negation accounted for 30% of all hallucinations, 3 out of 10. And here's the part that should keep CMIOs awake. Negation errors are nearly invisible to spell checkers, nearly invisible to vendor confidence scores, and nearly invisible to physician sign-off. Because a physician signing off on 20 notes at end of day is checking for missing content, not for inverted content. If your AI scribe has a 1% hallucination rate and 30% of those are negation flips, you are inverting a clinically significant statement in roughly 1 out of every 300 encounters. For a primary care practice doing 200 encounters a week, that is 2 clinical inversions per week, every week, in the chart in perpetuity. Category 4, adversarial. This one is newer, and it is the one the model providers do not want to talk about. A 2025 study tested 6 leading large language models. Researchers planted a single false detail in each clinical vignette. A fake lab value, a fake diagnosis, a fake symptom. They then asked the model to reason about the case. The models repeated or elaborated on the planted false detail in 50 to 82% of cases. The best performing models still hallucinated more than half the time. A mitigation prompt cut the rate in half, to around 44%. Setting temperature to 0 did not help. The hallucination was structural, not stochastic. What this means in production: if any upstream system, an AI scribe, an autofill tool, a copy-paste from another note, has introduced a false fact, every downstream LLM in your stack will assume it is true and reason about it as if it were true. The errors compound, they do not cancel. So those are the 4 categories. Now the question every CTO asks us: where do the guardrails go? The mistake almost every team makes is that they put all the guardrails at the output layer. They wrap a fact checker around the generated note. They run an LLM as a judge on the summary. They escalate low confidence outputs to a human reviewer. That stops some of the hallucinations. It stops none of the worst ones, because by the time you are checking the output, you have already lost the ground truth. You are checking the model's claim against another model's claim about the model's claim. The errors are now plausible, well-formatted, and internally consistent, which is exactly the property that makes hallucinations dangerous in the first place. Guardrails belong at 4 layers, not 1. Layer 1, input guardrails. Input guardrails sit before the model sees anything. For a clinical scribe, that means the audio pipeline. Trim leading and trailing silences. Long silences directly trigger fabricated speech and transcription models. Tag speaker turns explicitly so the model cannot conflate physician with patient. That closes the misattribution gap at its source. Reject audio segments with signal-to-noise ratios below threshold, rather than letting the model guess what was said. Layer 2, generation guardrails. Generation guardrails change what the model is allowed to do, not what it produces. The biggest lever here is retrieval grounding. A model generating a note from scratch can invent. A model generating a note grounded in a structured encounter record with explicit citations back to the source segment can invent far less. This is retrieval-augmented generation, done as a safety control, not as a feature. Every generated sentence must trace back to a source span in the encounter. Sentences that cannot trace are dropped, not surfaced. Layer 3, output guardrails. Output guardrails are where most teams stop. They are necessary, but they are the 3rd line of defense, not the 1st. What they do well: negation detection. Running a separate classifier, specifically looking for polarity flips between source and output. PHI leak detection, schema validation, confidence stratified human review cues, with the explicit understanding that confidence scores from LLMs are themselves untrustworthy and need to be calibrated against your own patient population. Layer 4, integration guardrails. This is the one nobody builds. Integration guardrails sit between the AI output and the systems of record, the EHR, the claim system, the patient portal, the population health platform. What they do: every AI-generated fact gets a provenance tag before it enters a system of record. Where did this come from? Which encounter? Which model? Which version? Which human signed off? When a hallucination is discovered downstream, and they will be discovered downstream, provenance tags let you find every other place the same hallucination has propagated and pull them in one operation. Without provenance tagging, you are hunting the hallucination through 10 systems by hand. Here is what this architecture produces when an auditor or a regulator asks, "Show me how you control AI-generated content in your clinical workflow." You hand them this: every AI-generated sentence in every patient record, where it came from, which model generated it, which guardrails it passed, which human accepted it, time-stamped, immutable. 6-year retention, the same HIPAA audit log standard we covered in the last video. The FDA's new 510K expectations for AI medical devices now require formal hallucination detection methods and documented trade-offs between output quality and diagnostic accuracy. This architecture is what those requirements look like in code. One closing principle: a hallucination is not a model bug. A hallucination is a model behaving exactly as designed, in a system that was not designed to contain it. The model is doing pattern completion. That is what it was built to do. Asking the model to stop hallucinating is asking the model to stop being a model. The work, the real engineering work, is building the system around the model so that when the inevitable pattern completion produces something clinically false, the system catches it at the layer where it can still be caught. 4 layers: input, generation, output, integration. Most teams build one. The good ones build 3. The audit-ready ones build all 4. We have built this 4-layer architecture for clinical AI deployments across 3 health systems and 1 ambient scribe vendor. The full reference architecture, every layer, every guardrail, every audit artifact, the provenance schema, the negation classifier we use, is in a 30-page technical brief. Free, gated only by an email address. Link in the description. If you are in the middle of deploying clinical AI right now, or evaluating a vendor that says they have solved hallucinations, and several will tell you that, this brief is what you compare them against. Last video, the 14-week rescue of a stalled HIPAA migration. Watch that next. Same engineering discipline, different problem. Next video, how the NHS Data Security and Protection Toolkit changed in version 8 and what your June 30th deadline actually requires. This is the algorithm.